Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the NWR Healthcare Conference Investment Panel. We've got my name's Mark Parhash. I'm founder and editor of BioShares, an investment newsletter that covers listed biotech companies. I've been doing that for 25 years. We've got three excellent panelists. Firstly, we've got Madeline Williams, a healthcare analyst from Canaccord. Welcome, Madeline.
Thanks, Mark.
We've got Brian Tan from corporate finance at Wilson's. And we've got Sean De Silva from KPRX. So welcome to all of you. Interesting, you're all in new roles in the last sort of 12 months, 18 months. Deshaun, you've just started up your own fund, KPRX.
The rapidly evolving healthcare sector
Beg pardon?
I said the rapidly evolving healthcare sector in Australia. We're all
let's hope so. Yeah. And Brian, you've just come across from MST to join Wilson's in corporate advisory.
Absolutely. To head up the healthcare advisory function, and it's been very good.
Yeah, and just turn my phone off. And Maddie, you've just last 6 months came across from Wilson, to Canaccord in Melbourne. Yeah, so great.
Yep.
All right,
Yep.
I'm going to just set things up where we're at the moment. It should be a fantastic time for biotech globally and Australia. Biotech tends to follow these 4 to 5 year cycles, which we're pretty close to being at that point now. Generally, it works on success of the industry, which drives positive sentiment and the success of maybe multiple major M&A deals in the US. The success of the weight loss drugs, Wegovy, Ozempic. In Australia, we've had stunning success in Telix, in Neuron, in the next cab off the rank, Dimeric's doing exceptionally well. Everything was going all really well. At the start of the year, I spoke to a fund manager earlier this week, and he said, yes, all going well until things start to get, let's say, a bit uncertain in the US with the new government. The Trump government, and massive trade wars, and looking to reduce government costs there. So maybe I'll start with Brian, with you. How do you see all this impacting the investment sector, biotech as well, and what should investors be thinking about that? Should they be sort of sitting on the sidelines for the 3 months, wait it out, moving to cash positions, or are we just going to sail through this? What are your thoughts, Brian?
That's a great question, Mark, and it's quite topical. I think you're the third person who's asked me this in the last week. If we look at what Elon Musk has done with Doge, there was this whole fear around getting rid of redundancies in the FDA, and that did happen. I think quite a lot of people were initially let go, but then they were very quickly rehired. There's been a bit of concern, I guess, in terms of there's some worry in the market that will approvals get delayed. I don't think that's happening. I don't think we're seeing that happening. And communicating with a lot of the companies that we look after and speaking to their chairs and the CEOs, the FDA has directly communicated with them to reassure them that nothing is going to change in terms of timelines. I think this makes a lot of sense because while Donald Trump can be a bit polarizing, he's not overly silly. I think, if you were to delay drug approvals and that resulted in Americans not getting the best treatments, if patients are starting to die from an optics perspective politically, it's not a good look. So I think, my thoughts, personal thoughts, I'm not too worried from the healthcare side. I think, we start to see a lot of news flow still coming through the FDA and no significant delays in things that are currently already being reviewed. Although I can't really comment if someone's putting a new application in, what that process will look like, but I think, time will tell.
Maddie, what are your views on this?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of largely agree with what Brian has said. I think that there has been, some uncertainty definitely coming to the market. I mean, I think for the majority of investors, there has been a pretty material sentiment shift. with the uncertainty around the macro environment that is driven by those changes in the US government. And I think that investors are adopting, clearly a more risk-off approach. And that obviously does have a big impact to sort of the micro and small cap healthcare names, particularly those that are sort of, in clinical development. But I agree with Brian, from the people that we've been speaking to, we can't identify any sort of immediate issues thus far with delays in approvals. We've seen one of the ASX listed healthcare companies, Nanosonics, has received a de novo approval today. So that's a good sign that, we're still seeing the news flow come through there. And yeah, I think that, our expectation would be, for the time being, that those that are already in the review process are essentially going to go to as planned. So I largely agree.
Yeah. And Sean, I'll get to you in a second, just on that question. I just did the numbers this morning, just looking at some indices. So the ASX 300 this year is down from its high, in February, it's down 8.4%. The Dow Jones is down just 1.4%. And the Nasdaq Biotech Index this year is up 3.6%. So certainly some more nervousness, I guess, in Australia, it appears, than in the US. So, Sean, what are your thoughts about how investors should be looking at this? And as an investor, are you waiting a bit more on the sidelines, perhaps looking at better entry opportunities?
Yeah, so actually on the point about the Nasdaq Biotech Index, the XBI, that was rebalanced recently to favor the large cap, the profitable companies. So it's no longer really a good measure of small cap or R&D stage sentiment. And so when you unwind the recap to the weightings that it was before the recap, the XBI is actually 45. So it's down a lot. I think it's close to all-time lows. So at the moment, the big ones in the XBI, like Gilead and other profitable companies, but it's actually masking how bad the sentiment is. On the points around the FDA, one interesting thing that we've heard from our regulatory consultants in the US is the number of job applications that they're getting from FDA employees is incredibly high. So one thing we're really worried about is a flight of institutional, or the loss of institutional knowledge from the FDA, which could theoretically slow down drug approvals, but probably more worryingly, it might result in drugs that shouldn't be approved getting approved, and you losing the seal, what an FDA approved drug actually means. And so when you look at medical devices, right, a 510(k), once you get that, well, that doesn't actually guarantee commercial success. You have to go prove it really to payers and users and insurers. Whereas when you get an FDA approval for a drug, the commercial success is quite de-risked, and we would hate to see that kind of being removed. The other side that we've seen a big impact for our portfolio companies is on grant funding. So if you were in front of the NIH or any of the thousands of bodies that manage grant funding in the US, that is all but gone. That's all but stopped. I haven't heard of any grants being funded or any kind of processes being moved forward for any of our portfolio companies or any companies that we speak to. On the point of whether you should sit on the sidelines or not, I'm of the firm belief that no one can time the market up, down, or sideways. And the risks for a biotech company in particular, the risks are all idiosyncratic, right? So the company, if the drug works, it doesn't really matter what the market is doing. And I get Neuron is a good example of that, right? So we invested in Neuron at $1 at the top of the market, and we exited, around $20 at the bottom of the market when the XBI was down 45%. But at the same time, Neuron's stock price went up 20x, not because the market did anything, but because they had a positive phase 3 trial, FDA approval for their drug, and commercial launch. And I think that's what investors should think about with all of these healthcare companies, biotech or medtech. The one caveat is on funding. So where the market does matter is when your company is raising money. So one thing that we're hyper focused on is funding runway and making sure our companies are adequately resourced to get to the next milestone, that we won't have the need for an emergency fundraise in such a dire market.
Okay. I agree with you when I look at our BioShares index, which covers about 150 stocks, and if we exclude the majors, the CSLs, but that performance last year was think that 37%, but we strip out three companies, Mesoblast, Telix, and Sigma, and it was a -4% result overall. So very much looks like it's still a stock pickers market. Get on to another topic now. Everyone is eagerly awaiting the results of a phase 3 study from Opthea. It's going into an extended trading halt. Now it's whether you're a holder or not, probably a pretty important result for the sector. Can I get some views on Opthea, on A, on what you're expecting, and B, on the importance of how important it is to the sector? Maddie, perhaps do you want to start on that?
Yep. I mean, looks, from our perspective, that being Canaccord, we think Opthea, their drug that's treating wet AMD, is a really interesting asset, and it has been backed by really the large phase 2 trials where it did deliver strong data. And so, there is reason to believe, and the way the trial is designed, that there should be a positive phase 3 result. Of course, the stock went into halt on Monday, and we're still waiting for it to come out of halt. And I think that perhaps the longer that we wait, the more skepticism there is about those results. And so, it's sort of anyone's guess at the moment what that result is. But I think when you're thinking about the implications for the sector more broadly, it is really important. I think the market is pretty aware that this sector, being biotech, is very risky. But these events always sort of bring to the front of people's minds how risky it is. I think if we were to see a positive result, that would really, in these sorts of markets where pre-revenue biotech stocks aren't really that loved, it would probably increase the relevance of these sorts of stocks. And then on the flip side, if it is negative, I think that it does hurt the sector more broadly. And sort of Hashan mentioned that when you're thinking about these sort of healthcare companies in these types of markets needing to fund their clinical development, I think that it becomes a lot trickier for them to get to support if we get a negative result, because people are less willing to invest in these sorts of stocks. But at the moment, it's really just a wait and see. We like to take the data that we have at hand previous to this, and so we have recently done a deep dive into the data, and we think that there is a strong case for it to be positive. But really, at this point, it's really a wait and see approach, and I guess we're sort of waiting with bated breath for Monday.
Yeah, I agree with those comments. Hashan, any additional views there? Thanks.
Yeah, so when I go back to kind of when I made the transition over from industry into investing, to the best of my knowledge, there was one profitable biotech company in Australia. That was CSL. And fast forward to today, we've got CSL, Neuren, and Telix. When people ask me, what do we need in Australia? What is the missing ingredient that we need to have a thriving ecosystem that rivals the US? And I think the thing that we need is success, is winners, right? It's companies like Opthea that are able to self-fund two large phase 3 clinical trials in Australia, show positive result, and then commercialize that while having their headquarters in Australia. I'm only aware of one other Australian company that has been able to self-fund a phase 3 program outside of rare disease. So I think that alone is quite an incredible achievement, and the team there should be proud. The results are now in the hands of higher powers, unfortunately, and I really hope for the health of our sector and for the confidence from generalist investors that the results are positive.
Just if the trial result is negative, and we certainly all hope it's not, will it then start the discussion? Should Australian biotechs be, engaging in large, multi-thousand patient phase 3 studies, given the that dilution that occurs, the amount of capital that needs to be raised? I mean, Opthea's raised well over, I think, over $1 billion to get to this point. Should we just be sticking to rare disease trials, smaller trials, and for larger trials, partnering before they engage in phase 3? Have any comments there, guys?
I might jump in here. I think, Australia has such incredible IP. We have such brilliant minds in this country and so many incredible innovations. Unfortunately, we've got a much smaller market than the US, I guess, in terms of dollar value. And because of that, things tend to be a little bit slower. Um, I'm a big fan I'm a big fan of, Australian biotechs. And to Hashan's point, I think, and to Maddie's point as well, we're all very anxiously, hopefully optimistic with the results because unfortunately with clinical trials, your results very binary. It either works or it doesn't, and that might be because of how the trial is designed. Ideally you hit your primary endpoint, and that's good, but oftentimes, even if you don't hit your primary endpoint, if your secondary endpoints are quite strong, strategically you can create a good case around it, for a lot of various molecules. If we use, the GLP-1s, for instance, if we really take a big step back as to why they were first invented, they were really meant to help patients with type 2 diabetes. That weight loss element has now become very much monetized. And I would almost say that the weight loss is more of a side effect, more so than the primary effect when they were doing their initial GLP-1 trials. Historically, we've seen this happen across various drug classes. Most famous one, I guess, would be sildenafil, right? They were looking for an antihypertensive in a very crowded market, and while the side effect was, getting erections in men, and then Pfizer decided to market that. So to take it back to your main question, Mark, I think Australian companies should be, getting funding. They should have the ambitions to run trials. We just need to find the right sources of funding for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me
Okay,
jump
I'm
in
going to
there
move
with
on.
a kind of an
Yes, sure,
emphatic,
Sean. Go.
sorry, I'll quickly jump in there with an emphatic no, right? I mean, I don't believe that there is anything inherently or genetically that makes us inferior to the US, right? So I think that we can and we should. And what I always tell my portfolio companies is you can't bank on an acquisition or a licensing deal. You can't run a company assuming that you're going to get acquired or you're going to get bought. You need a plan to take this thing all the way to market. And if an acquisition or a licensing deal happens, then great. But that just means, you've got to create the data package in preclinical phase 1, phase 2 that would support you going out and raising the money to do a phase 3 trial.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think that I don't think it's helpful at all to think that in Australia we can't take the right drug all the way through. I think that the bar is higher, and sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. But I think that we can for sure in Australia ensure that we can take a drug to market and and see that valuation uplift that you get from taking the drug all the way through.
But Hashan, for that to occur, don't we need maybe some more specialist, larger funds like yours, but times 10, sort of, some $500 million funds, specific biotech funds in Australia that can really take the lead on this, and then encourage overseas funds to come in with that.
Yeah, 100%, right. So when we kind of map where the funds are in Australia, the majority of healthcare VC funds are focused on spinning IP out of universities. They're pre-seed and earlier investors, company creators, incubators. But the money actually kind of becomes less and less as the requirement goes up and up, right? So a phase 2 trial might cost 30 million, but a preclinical animal model might cost 300 grand. So that's a bit of a conundrum. And I'm not sure how we've evolved to be like that, how the market's evolved to be like that. But yeah, I completely agree, right? We need more funds. We need 100 funds like myself that can syndicate deals, and take these companies forward. And I think that the lead investor needs to be healthcare investors that take the lead, right? It's very difficult for like a generalist investor might do one investment, might write a big check for one, and if it doesn't work, well, they don't have to invest in healthcare. Whereas that's all we do.
And I'm not asking you to comment on this, but I'm just noting, one example is Anteris Technologies, which was here, and did a re-domicile to the US, and have its main listing there, and raised 140 mil for its major 1,000 patient phase 3 study with its aortic heart valve. And their rationale being they wanted the exposure to larger, experienced, specific biotech funds. So we'll see how that plays out. Anyway, we'll just move on, and just circling back to you, Brian, just want to, it's always good to get some of your favourite stock picks. If we get a couple of stocks that you like and why. And Hashan, why not? We'll wait till Maddie's off the call, and then we'll get to you about some of your favourite picks. But Brian, what are a couple of your favourite stocks out there at the moment, and why are they? What makes you excited about them?
Well, actually, one that I've been watching very closely and I really like is Clarity. It's priced to buy at the moment. But the data that they've put out, beyond GU cancers, we look at their FAP program. We look at the preclinical data that was just released in HER2 positive disease, attaching the copper molecule to trastuzumab. That for me is paradigm shifting. HER2 positive breast cancer, notoriously hard to detect on conventional FDG PET CT imaging, even difficult with MRI. The preclinical data that was released, I think it was the 10th of February this year, the images just in the mice model was phenomenal. I was quite blown away. We then factor in that Louise Emmett did do a study with SARBIS previously looking at HER2 negative and ER positive cancers, and that was really good as well. So now I think, they almost have a pan breast potential, in terms of imaging, but also for therapeutics, with copper 64, copper 67. We look at their fat program again, fat proteins expressed in a lot of different cancers. I think, unfortunately, a lot of the times, and happy to be challenged here, a lot of the times, investors view Clarity as trying to compete with Telix. I disagree with that. I think Clarity actually sits above that. I think that they have the potential to be a pan-oncology cancer, and their pipeline does support that as well. And the data is very solid. So I'm a big fan of Clarity. And another one that I've been watching very closely, and they're about to get their FDA response, is EBR. They've got a very cool non-invasive.
So can you explain what EBR does?
So EBR is an electrophysiology company on cardiac side, and they have a very cool device that is able to externally pace patients with heart failure who have failed conventional pacemakers, conventional therapy, by innovating the endocardium directly. So that for me is really, really cool. They did have some challenges, I guess, recruiting because their trial was done during COVID. So they had to shift from an RCT over to a single arm study. But the single arm data was good. Now we look at the RCT data, the limited, of course, that was actually very positive as well. So they're anticipating an FDA response by mid-April, I think, by the 18th at the very latest. So I'm watching that one very closely. I think it's going to be a significant improvement in patients' quality of life because they're treating a patient pool that no one else could touch or would want to touch.
And Brian, you're still a practicing physician, is that right?
I am indeed. Actually, I'll be in the department this weekend. I still practice in the emergency department. For me, it's very important to be able to see how getting the right companies to market, getting the right products to market as well will have such a positive impact on our patients. And it keeps me very grounded, I guess. In emergency, I guess, we see everything under the sun. I always tell everyone, I know a little bit about a lot of things and I know a lot about very little. But I know enough to identify, I hope, what the problem is, which disease system, how I can stabilize them, but more importantly, which specialist I can call for help. And then tapping on that, I can then, when I have a very interesting company that I don't know in much detail, I can call a friend to go, hey, what are your thoughts on this, that, the other? So yeah.
Very helpful. All right, we'll move on to Maddie. You've got to go in about 5 minutes, Maddie. What are a couple of the stocks that you like at the moment?
Yeah, funnily enough, I think look, the three names that I would put forward are Clarity. I agree with everything that Brian has said, and I think that the only thing that I would add is that they are going after prostate cancer, which has got a lot of attention, but they're developing sort of potentially best-in-class assets, and I think the sort of market underestimates the ability for them to go in and actually disrupt the market, that's been established over the last couple of years in both the diagnostic and therapy, and I think that they have that kind of next generation type asset. And the nice thing in healthcare and science is that the most efficacious and most safe product usually wins. And so I think that Clarity have that ability to do that. With EBR, I agree also. I think that, they're coming up to their FDA approval, and I think that it becomes a very important stock on the ASX in the next 2 years.
That's in April, is that right? Is it?
It should be hopefully on or before April 11th. We presume, and we're very confident of FDA approval. EBR have done a phenomenal job over the last couple of years to kind of make sure that they're ready going into this commercial launch. And so we're really looking forward to seeing how that goes. And as I said, I think it becomes a very important stock. They're moving into a revenue generating company, and that is what investors are looking for. And so that binary outcome is somewhat removed. As Hashan said before, with devices, there is a higher bar for commercial success for devices. But we think EBR are positioned really nicely because they've locked in high pricing, reimbursement, and they've got a core group of physicians that already know how to use the device, given it's a complex procedure. So we're really looking forward to that. I think the other one that we're really excited about, and they've got readouts in the near term, is Syntara. Syntara are a smaller company, so they're about 130 mil market cap. They presented yesterday at NWR, and the reason I think that we're excited about Syntara is because they have an asset in a disease called myelofibrosis. So it's a type of blood cancer. And when you look to the standard of care in that disease, they are treated with drugs called JAK inhibitors. In the US, those drugs do about $1.9 billion per year. And up to 70% of patients that are treated with those drugs have a suboptimal response. So they're needing an additional therapy. When we were looking at the landscape in myelofibrosis and how Syntara's asset matches up, we were really pleasantly surprised how well it matches up against competitors. It looks like there's a long list of competitors in this space, but in fact, many of the drugs are unsafe and they don't provide enough benefit for patients. And when you look to Syntara's, it's a very safe drug. It's shown really positive early signs. There's not many patients that have been treated thus far, but the early signs are really positive. They have 12-month data coming out within the next month or two from their phase 2 trial that's used in combination with the JAK inhibitor. And so we're really looking forward to that. And, going back to talking about companies, ASX listed companies, and whether or not they can run a phase 3, Syntara are going to move into that position where if their results are positive, they would transition into looking to run a phase 3 trial, where we're sort of thinking.
That's not going to be a large phase 3 though, is it?
No, it's not going to be. So it's not Opthea. We think it's going to be about 300 to 350 patients.
Yeah.
And we really think that that's something that they can do, and the valuation uplift that they could get from running that phase 3 trial, is really large. And so we're really excited for how that goes in the next couple of months. And we think it kind of goes overlooked by the market. So we're excited.
Hey, Maddie, just before you go, just quickly on Neuren, how excited are you about their follow-up compound 2566 and starting a phase 3? Would that cause a stock re-rating?
I think that so look, we're really positive on Neuren, and even more so positive on 2591. I think we think it's a better drug. We think the market kind of hasn't given them much credit for it over the last kind of 6 months in particular, because they have been sorting out the phase 3 trial design. We think that when they can confirm that they've agreed upon a phase 3 trial, that does reinstate and brings to the forefront of investors' minds, what that drug is worth, and the fact that it actually could be done quite quickly. The thing that they have agreed on with the FDA is that it's going to be a 12-week trial. So
Right.
we're not waiting a 12 or 13-week trial. We're not waiting years and years for this drug to come to market. And the nice thing is that the first indication, Phelan-McDermid syndrome, that'll provide a really nice pathway for the second Pitt-Hopkins. So we shouldn't have this big gap between the second indication. So once we get confirmation of this first one, we think that the stock starts moving.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Maddie. And I think they're looking at starting that phase 3 this year, the second half of this year.
Yeah, they are.
Okay, I'll let you go. Thanks, Maddie, for your time.
No worries. Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Nice chatting.
Okay, right. Hashan, how's things going with the fund? So can you give us a bit of a background on when you launched the fund? I don't know if you want to say how large it is and how much you've invested so far as a percentage.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of so we launched the fund, officially got the first close 30 June last year. So the fund has been investing for about 8 months. So a bit of the background of the story, I used to work at Cast Peak as the head of healthcare there. We had some big exits, and the founder of Cast Peak provided me with seed funding to start KPRX in the same vein that he got seed funding from Tiger in New York. And so our focus is biotech, medtech, medical devices, both public and private. And we tend to be a later stage investor than your typical Aussie investor. So for a drug company, we're after first in human, medical device company closer towards approval. And we're really trying to help that company bridge the gap between early kind of proof of concept to get them to, I guess, an exit event, whether it's a acquisition, license, M&A. So most of our investing in the current landscape has been private, and that's really been driven by where we're seeing opportunities. So we're talking about a bear market in the listed space. I don't know, it'd be a triple bear market in the private space in Australia. Like it is very tough for Australian healthcare companies that are private to raise capital in this market. Generalist investors really aren't there. There isn't that much private specialist money. And so we're seeing, as an investor, we're seeing incredible opportunities. We'll get to final close on the 30th of June this year, and then we'll then update on, we will kind of announce publicly what the size of the fund is then. We just don't want to give any running commentary on a fundraise. So in terms of the investments that we've done, so Syntara that Maddie was just talking about, Curvebeam, I sit on the boards of both those companies, and then 2 private companies. One's called Skin to Neuron, which is a cell therapy for Alzheimer's, which I think is quite amazing. And we recently invested in a company called Inventure, which is a private medical device company that's got a 3D printing technology to assist early drug discovery work.
How do you spell that, Sean?
INVENTIA.
Yeah. Okay. So, and in terms of funds committed, percentage of funds committed, can you say how much you've got committed, or does that depend on your final close, really?
It depends on the final close. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, to companies listening, we have plenty of dry powder. We made 4 investments, so we've got dry powder.
Okay. I note that the CEO, I think Greg of Curvebeam just presented. Curvebeam is one I've struggled to understand, Hisham. Can you maybe, for myself and for investors listening, just try and explain the investment rationale there in Curvebeam, what they're doing, and what makes a unique product, and why there should be demand, and why it should be a successful company.
Yeah, so Curvebeam manufactures and sells a device called the HiRise, which is weight-bearing CT. So put it really simply, CT devices that are out in the market currently, you lie down and you get an image. Where weight-bearing is different is you're standing up. And so where that makes a difference is orthopedic surgery in the lower limb. So foot and ankle, knee, and hip. So when you stand up, the distribution of weight causes the joints to completely look different than when you're lying down. And so a joint taken, a CT scan image of a joint not underweight will hide pathologies. And so there's some images in Curvebeam's deck that shows on one image a normal looking knee, and then underweight you can see where there's bone on bone contact, which is then causing osteoarthritis and pathology. Why we are really excited about Curvebeam is that their device is small, it's cheap, it's fully self-shielded, and can sit at the point of care for an orthopedic surgeon.
So how does that differ to what's currently available?
So at the moment, when you go in to see an orthopedic surgeon in the US, if they need a CT scan, they'll refer you to the vast majority will refer you to a hospital or to an imaging clinic. And so that in Australia might not be that much of a headache, but sure, you have to, do another visit. In the US, it can be quite a bit of a headache. So you have to go home, you have to find what's in your insurance coverage, you have to find out if there's a copay or no copay. It's a whole thing. And then you get the image, and then you have to go back to the surgeon for planning. With Curvebeam's weight-bearing CT device that's in the clinic, you can get imaged at the same time as you see your surgeon. So everything's done in one visit. The surgeon has all the data they need to then inform you of what your surgery is, and you can get booked in for surgery. It can all be done in one visit. That's kind of the convenience aspect of it. Obviously, there is dozens of publications now to show why there are better patient outcomes with weight bearing, without weight bearing.
Yeah,
You go.
hasn't done that well on the market, the stock. What's the reason for that? Is it lack of understanding, or the company had some setbacks, or?
Yeah, so one other thing I'll quickly raise is the other benefit is that the high-rise device is a revenue generating bit of kit for surgeons. So the CT scans are reimbursed. And so when you go on the deck, you can see examples of how much customers can make. So it's not we're not asking them to make a CapEx purchase for a device because of better patient outcomes. It can actually become quite a profitable device for them. Why hasn't it done well? Lots of learnings here. We IPO'd the business in a time, I guess, when the IPO window was shut. The market hasn't done well, and Curbeam's stock is very liquid. So when you look at the register of Curbeam, it's institutional investors and the board and founders. So I think institutional investors are almost 50% of the company. The founders and management team, probably about another 35% of the company. So the actual free float is very small. And so it's very liquid, and the stock moves wildly on $10,000 worth of trades. And so in a down market, in a bear market where you're not getting generalist investors buying into new companies, you can see these kind of material derating of a stock price. The other thing that was a surprise as well was there was a bit of a lull in sales. So Curbeam's partner in the US is a group called Stryker, which is the largest orthopedics company in the world. So the deal was done with Stryker just prior to IPO. And it took Stryker a bit longer to learn how to sell the device and to really get their sales force humming than I think anyone thought. But we're seeing that kind of turn around. The last quarter, Curbeam had 10 devices sold, revenue of 5 million. The cost base is being kind of right sized to fit that kind of revenue run rate. And so we're actually quite excited about the future of Curbeam.
Okay. Company called Skin to Neuron, which is a fascinating company. The CEO at the time presented briefly at one of our summits a couple of years ago that transplanting these cells into a dog that had seemingly neurological disorders, and after the implant, those being completely resolved. It seems like a fantastic, hard to believe sort of technology. Can you give us a quick snapshot of that?
Yeah, so effectively what they're doing is they're taking skin cells, so hair follicle cells, and then without the need to do any engineering or any genetic editing or any really kind of expensive bioreactor work, these cells differentiate into neurospheres. And when those neurospheres are implanted into the part of the brain that we're concerned about, the hippocampus, they differentiate into the right type of neuron, but even more importantly, they make the right synaptic connections without the need. So under in the environment of the brain with the right neurotropic factors, these cells actually differentiate, and there is lots of data now to show what that looks like and how that works. And so we normally don't invest in a company this early. And what got us really excited was that the animal model they did in dogs. So dogs develop Alzheimer's disease naturally. When you look at a lot of animal models, mice or whatever it might be, the disease is mimicked. So you either you do a xenograft model, or you blast them with bleomycin or something like that to mimic a disease. Whereas dogs develop Alzheimer's disease naturally, similar to humans. The part of the brain that we're actually concerned about, the hippocampus, is very similar between a dog and a human. That's the part of the brain, the archicortex, that hasn't really changed much going back into small animals. So we think the data they generated in dogs is actually quite translatable into humans. And the results in dogs was very stark. So we're not talking about slowing of a disease. We're talking about potentially reversing. Not
Yeah, I saw the video. It was remarkable.
Yeah, it is remarkable. And as a dog owner, you can tell the small changes in your dog, but the changes that they saw in these dogs were not small, right? They went from aggressive, unmanageable dogs to they lost their aggressive behavior. They were eating again, and they were recognizing their owners. So I think 2 of the dogs had complete resolution of all symptoms, and the majority of the dogs, their symptom score fell below what would be an Alzheimer's disease classification.
How far away are they from the clinic, from putting it into humans?
Yeah, so the work that needs to be done now is all around manufacturing and process. So that work is going through finding a appropriate manufacturing partner in Australia that can do phase 1 and then potentially phase 2. And we're looking at ways to minimize as much variability from the extracting the cells, growing the cells, and then the surgical procedure to implant the cells, what the consumables look like. This is kind of really in the weeds basic work to make sure that the trial fails, it's because the drug didn't work, not because we screwed something else up. So we
there's a
think they're
couple
probably
of years from the clinic, do you think?
probably 18 months from the clinic. And
18 months.
if this can
Okay,
be,
well, yeah,
so I was going to say, if the data from
go
those
on.
can be replicated in 5 humans, we think that's an exit event for the company. And so one of the investors in Synteneuron right now is a top 3 global pharma company. Their corporate venture capital arm is invested in Synteneuron. And that shows you the quality of this data. Yeah, we're very excited. If you can show reversal of memory loss in even 5 patients with Alzheimer's disease, that's kind of Nobel science winning medicine.
Yeah, fascinating. We've got a few minutes left. I'll just one final topic perhaps to discuss is are there any areas that are for investors, for you guys as investors or analysts or in corporate finance that you see as being a hot space? Is it radiopharmaceuticals, orphan drugs, neurological diseases? Is there anything that stands out at the moment for you guys?
I guess for me, radiopharmaceuticals definitely. If we look at it from a global perspective, there are really only 4 big companies at the moment. You've got your Novartis, Lantheus, Telix, and Clarity. 2 of the 4 are Australian, and I think radiopharma for me is very, very exciting. I did help launch the lutetium therapy back in the day, so I think it's a very, very exciting space. There's a huge area of unmet need there, and the data that's coming out, from a pan cancer side is phenomenal. And another one, I guess, is electrophysiology. When I was going through medical school, everyone wanted to be an interventional cardiologist. It was the cool thing to do. Now we're seeing that shift, in the medical space towards EP, for cardiologists. And I think we're only just barely scratching the surface with that. If we look at Boston's acquisition of TheraPulse, it just hit $1 billion revenue in the last 12 months. Pulse field ablation is becoming quite huge compared to conventional RF or cryoablation. And there are companies that in Australia who are doing something similar but at a much lower cost. And look at EBR as well from an EP perspective. I think it's quite exciting. But what are your thoughts, Ashan?
I was just going to say, so your mates wanted to be EPs. They're clearly much more competitive than my mates at med school. They wanted to be GPs and CPs. So that's good to know. We hung in different crowds. Yeah, look, I mean, when it comes to hot or not hot sector, we've never invested in a company because the sector is hot.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, at Cast Peak and here at KPRS, we're very bottom up, right? Is the drug, does the risk reward make sense based on the valuation?
Can I rephrase the question to you, Hashan? Do you have a preference for investing in drug companies when you talked about the risk? Once you get approved, the risk of success is a lot lower compared to a device company. Maybe you're seeing that with Curvebeam. It's perhaps easy to get it to market, but the risk of market success is a lot higher. Do you have a preference on what you invest in?
That's a great question. The other kind of thing with devices as well is device acquirers, strategics, tend to wait a lot later to buy you as a company. You don't see very many often R&D stage med tech acquisitions. That's always after some kind of commercial traction. And so, yeah, to actually go back to a question you asked before around funding and what we can do in Australia, that is something that really comes into our thinking when we're looking at investing in a company. Like, can this company fund itself to get to where it needs to get to? And sometimes that makes some medical device and medtech investments difficult. Because if we think that this company needs to go to get some kind of commercial traction before there's a feasible exit, well, how are they going to get there? So that means that really it makes rare disease drug companies, it just gives them it doesn't make them more attractive, but it gives them an advantage, right? Because the clinical trials are cheaper, you can get the proof of concept a lot quicker, and biotech and the acquisitions in rare diseases happen at phase 2 stage. So, yeah, I mean, I know naturally I have a bias towards biotech, given my background, working in the industry and my medical background, but I try my best not to have a preference, Mark. That's probably the best political
Okay.
answer.
Couple more questions for you, Sean. Do you syndicate with your investments? When you invest, do you try to get other investors on board to try and I guess increase the level of funding that's accessible to that company?
Yes, yeah, we have to. We're not large enough to be able to do deals ourselves. So Curbeam is an example. We syndicated it with probably half a dozen generalist investors. So when you look at who's substantial now, you got Firetrail, and I think you got one other, but I don't want to name it if they're not substantial. With Inventure, we syndicated with 10 Mile, with Skin to Neuron. I was with Synthesis down in Melbourne. Not only is the money, it's not just the money that people bring to the table. They've got different backgrounds, different skill sets, and the market here, the VC funds in Australia, we know each other pretty well, and we do kind of lean on each other.
So, Sean, is there? It looks like you focus predominantly or only on Australian biotech. Is there enough here for you to look at keep you busy without going to the US?
Yeah, definitely. Right. So I need, with my strategy, we need 5 to 10 good companies to create a portfolio. We don't need dozens. And you can actually go so I don't believe that you get any risk mitigation by diversification in this sector, because all the risk is idiosyncratic. You can easily as pick 30 losers as you can pick 10 losers, right?
Yeah.
If you happen to pick a winner in a diversification strategy, it's luck. And so in the companies that we've looked at, I mean, we could have written much larger checks into every company that we invested in. So our fund size right now could have been 10x in size, and we could have just done these 4 investments. And it actually would have been better for our investors because we removed the funding risk from these companies. We funded them better to get to where they need to get to. So yeah, and I think as well, when you go to the US, there's a lot of competition. There's hundreds of funds, so there'll be an adverse selection with the companies that eventually get to you. Are the ones, it's the tuna that John West rejects would be the companies that get to you.
And congratulations with one of your first investments in Centara, which has done very nicely since you've entered the register. So well done.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we're very excited. Like, one example of how undervalued Aussie biotech is, Cartos with similar data at a similar stage raised $150 million on a 500 mil pre-money valuation, giving it a Aussie dollar post-money 1 bill valuation. Centara right now is an Aussie dollar 120 EV of about 100. So we see the exits are the same because it's the same buyers buying these companies, but the entry prices are far lower. So we're very excited with Centara.
Right. All right, we better wrap it up there. Thanks, Brian and Hashan, for your time. That's been, I hope everyone's found that interesting, perhaps giving you some investment ideas and try to explain where we're at in terms in biotech and in what's happening around the world as well. So we'll leave it there. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark.